What if the United States wasn't so united? Tensions are rising, divisions are deepening, and for some states, the idea of breaking away isn't just a fantasy, it's a conversation happening right now. Secession movements, economic rifts, political clashes. These are cracks in the foundation of a country that once seemed unbreakable. But could the unthinkable actually happen? In this video, we're diving into the 10 U.S. states that have the strongest reasons, and the most viable paths, to secede from the Union. Some have historical independence movements, others control massive economies that could sustain them, and a few are simply fed up with Washington. But before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into the biggest geopolitical shifts happening right now. And if you enjoy this content, give it a like, it helps more than you think. Now, let's get into it. 1. Texas, the Lone Star State's never-ending secession talk. Let's start with the heavyweight, Texas. The only state that was its own independent country before joining the U.S. in 1845. Texid isn't just an online meme. It's a real political movement with a growing base. Texas has the 8th largest economy in the world, fueled by oil, tech, and agriculture. It also has its own power grid, military bases, and a strong culture of independence. The Texas nationalist movement has been pushing for a referendum on secession for years, arguing that the federal government no longer represents Texas's interests. But here's the catch: legally, Texas can't just walk away. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 1869 that unilateral secession is unconstitutional. And let's not forget, Texas receives billions in federal funding for disaster relief, infrastructure, and border security. Independence wouldn't be easy, but if any state could pull it off, Texas is at the top of the list. 2. California, a nation within a nation. California isn't just big, it's a global powerhouse. If it were an independent country, it would have the 5th largest economy in the world, ahead of the UK and India. Hollywood, Silicon Valley, agriculture, California dominates multiple industries. But the state also has serious political and cultural clashes with the federal government, from climate policies to immigration laws. The Calixid movement gained momentum after the 2016 election, with activists arguing that California sends more money to Washington than it gets back. However, leaving the Union wouldn't be simple. California relies heavily on federal trade agreements, military defense, and disaster relief, especially with its constant wildfires. But if the U.S. ever faced a major fracture, California has the economic muscle to stand on its own. 3. Alaska, the resource-rich wild card. Alaska is another state with a history of independence movements. The Alaskan Independence Party, founded in the 1980s, still believes the U.S. illegally annexed the state. And let's be honest, Alaska is barely connected to the rest of the country. It's closer to Russia than it is to Washington, D.C. The state has massive natural resources, from oil to fishing, making it theoretically self-sufficient. But here's the problem: federal money. Nearly 40% of Alaska's budget comes from Washington. Plus, the U.S. military presence is enormous, with bases strategically positioned near the Arctic. Breaking away would mean losing billions in funding, and making some very powerful enemies. 4. Hawaii, the sovereignty battle that never ended. Hawaii's history with the U.S. is complicated. The Kingdom of Hawaii was overthrown in 1893, and many native Hawaiians still believe the annexation was illegal. Sovereignty movements continue to this day, with some pushing for full independence. The state has a strong economy based on tourism and trade, but here's the issue: it imports nearly 90% of its food and goods. Without federal trade agreements, Hawaii could struggle with basic necessities. And like Alaska, it's home to key U.S. military bases, including the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. Would Washington ever let it go? Unlikely. 5. Vermont, the republic that never forgot. Believe it or not, Vermont was once its own republic before joining the U.S. in 1791. Today, it still has active secessionist movements, arguing that its progressive values don't align with federal policies. Vermont's economy is small but self-sustaining, with a focus on agriculture and tourism. But the challenge? Federal funding. The state receives significant money for healthcare, education, and infrastructure. Plus, with a population of just 650,000, it might struggle to stand alone in a world dominated by superpowers. 6. New Hampshire, the Libertarian Escape Plan. New Hampshire's motto is literally, "Live free or die," and it means it. The state is a haven for libertarians, many of whom believe the federal government has too much control. The Free State Project has been attracting thousands of libertarians who dream of a more self-sufficient New Hampshire. The state already has no general sales tax or income tax, making it one of the least financially dependent on the U.S. government. But here's the problem. Federal money still plays a role in infrastructure and education. And with a population of just 1.4 million, would New Hampshire have the power to go it alone? 7. Oregon, the state trying to redraw the map. Oregon's problem isn't about leaving the U.S., it's about splitting in half. The urban-rural divide in the state is massive. While Portland leans progressive, Eastern Oregon is overwhelmingly conservative. This divide has fueled the Greater Idaho movement, where rural Oregon counties want to leave and join Idaho. The issue? Legislative approval. Both the Oregon and Idaho governments would have to agree, something that's unlikely in the near future. 8. South Carolina, history repeating itself? South Carolina was the first state to secede before the Civil War, and some residents still believe the state should have more autonomy. Its economy is strong, with major industries like manufacturing and agriculture, but it relies on federal disaster relief for hurricanes and flooding. The idea of independence resurfaces now and then, but in reality, South Carolina is deeply tied to the Union's economy and military structure. 9. Florida, a wild card with an economic edge. Florida's economic power is undeniable. Tourism, aerospace, agriculture, and international trade make it one of the strongest economies in the U.S. Some have even suggested that Florida could function as an independent entity, given its trade ties with Latin America. But there's a major issue: hurricanes. Florida depends heavily on federal disaster aid, and its military presence is massive, with key bases like MacDill Air Force Base. Secession might sound interesting, but it's far from realistic. 10. Washington, the birthplace of Cascadia. Washington is home to Amazon, Microsoft, Boeing, companies that power the global economy. It also has one of the largest trade ports on the West Coast. The Cascadia movement pushes for an independent nation combining Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia. While Washington has the economy to stand alone, its reliance on federal trade agreements and military funding makes secession unlikely, at least for now. Final thoughts. Could secession ever happen? The reality? Secession is nearly impossible under U.S. law. Any attempt would face massive legal, economic, and military pushback. But the fact that these movements exist at all speaks volumes about the growing divisions within the country. What do you think? Could any of these states actually pull it off? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe for more eye-opening content. See you next time.